One of the most iconic villains, not only in Dragon Ball, but in all anime and manga, is Frieza. Originally a one and done villain over 30 years ago, he's gone on to be resurrected twice and is now even being set up for another return in the manga soon. Why is this character so popular? On the surface, he's nothing more than a mustache-twirling villain devoid of complexity. But I think if we dig deeper, we can get a better understanding of the character. So let's take a deep dive into the one, the only, Frieza. 絶対に許さんぞ虫けらどもじわじわとなぶり殺してくれる一人たりとも逃がさんと覚悟しろ私の戦闘力数は53万です。ご覧のように私はあなたたちのドラゴンボールとやらを集めているフリーザというものです。Frieza leads the Friezagun, or Frieza Army, also known as the Planet Trade Organization, which he inherited from his father, King Cold. He is also the descendant of Chilled, who ruled ages before Frieza's time. Frieza's name, of course, is another typical Toriyama pun coming from the word freezer, which is why I can't stand the Funimation spelling Frieza. I don't know, it makes no sense. Sorry if you guys like that one. But anyway, Toriyama actually was envisioning a refrigerator when creating the character, which is why a lot of the characters, I should say his underlings, are named after things you find within a refrigerator, not a freezer actually. But he also got a lot of inspiration from one of his editors, according to the Daizenshu, which I recently did a rant on. Another real big inspiration for the character was real estate speculators. Again, this came out in the 1980s originally, and just those type of people, I guess, were really common in Japan, people who were just trying to buy up land to resell it to make profit. And according to Toriyama, these were the worst types of human beings possible. So he wanted to create a villain that was the worst possible being imaginable, and that's where he got the inspiration for Frieza from. Now, if you want to put that into like today's terms for like what young people would understand possibly, it's like card game scalpers, Pokemon card game scalpers. They're buying up stuff that other people want and then trying to sell it back for a profit. So I guess you could kind of look at it that way as well. 何を言い出すかと思えば While not much is known of Frieza's past, I mean, if you go by the manga, nothing is known of Frieza's past. Toriyama gave us a lot of information that I think is useful in the film Dragon Ball Super Broly. At the start of the movie, King Cold takes his son to the planet Vegeta. He basically wants to introduce the Saiyans to his son who is about to take over. He plans on retiring. Right at the start here, there is some really interesting information. It's important to note that when they arrive, King Vegeta, Vegeta's father, he goes with a smile on his face. King Cold, we're honored to have you in our presence. We haven't seen you in ages. He puts his hand out to shake his hand. Cold doesn't even look at him. He kind of ignores him the whole time and basically just says, yeah, this is my son. He's taking over, okay? You got to listen to what he says from now on. That is insulting. And that is key because Frieza sees this is how you're supposed to treat others. This is how you're supposed to treat everyone else in the galaxy who is beneath us because we're stronger, we're in control, and he's learning these lessons from his father. We can just from this tiny little nugget, we learn that that's probably what he's seen since he was a tiny little child, was that his father walks all over everybody. And therefore that's how it's supposed to be. They're above us. They're better than everyone. It's just a minor thing. Frieza then goes on to deliver the scouters and basically immediately says, hey, you got a few guys out there pointing weapons at me, I see. Oh, they have power levels of 2,000. Judging by the time period, 2,000 would be quite impressive for Saiyans, given that's far stronger than Raditz, So he wants to show off what he can do. Boom, 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 kills them all with ease, without even kind of trying, to be honest. It is an important moment because it instills fear into them. Seeing that, 2,000 might be considered their, some of their elite warriors, Frieza just easily took them out. And now when Cold's basically like, you got to listen to what he says, they are not going to argue with that. 邪魔ですね。邪魔なんですよ。あの山がね。
これですっきりと見通しが良くなりましたね。
Frieza's first appearance, of course, is in the Namek Saga. Now, he's quite hyped up because, I mean, I guess you could say that about a lot of the villains. You know, Raditz hypes up Vegeta and Nappa saying, two more Saiyans are coming, they're way stronger than me. I think they do it a little bit even more here because, of course, we get Kaiosama King Kai, and we get that whole moment where Goku's in space on his way there, and he's like, yeah, they're running into some trouble there, and it's not Frieza, is it? And Goku's like, I don't know. And of course, he does the whole sense over there, and he's like, oh my God, he's like, you can't go there, you can't fight him. There is some really cool stuff about this. So, first off, yeah, you know, we understand Frieza's like the top dog in the galaxy essentially at this point, and he knows that if they go there, they're gonna die. But that's not 100% it. He's also saying that let's say they go there and they survive, which they do. He's saying that his wrath is endless and that he basically will not let anything go. That is honestly what happens throughout the rest of this entire series. You know, every time he comes back and stuff like that. And I think that tells us a lot about his character, that this is someone that it's almost like going to like a hornet's nest and like pissing it off, you know, poking at it. They're gonna come after you. And the fact that Goku and them go there and they literally, you know, push him, he never lets them go. And I think that's quite interesting. Obviously, of course, if you've seen like my what if video where like everybody dies at the end, the what if Raditz had never come to Earth, this is an essential part of their growth by going there and going through this experience. But at the same time, I think for Frieza, we understand that he is definitely the type of character that does not let things go, unlike a lot of the other characters throughout the series. Now, Frieza, of course, in addition to being set up as this terrifying villain, we are shown just how cold-hearted he is. He's willing to kill children. He doesn't care. Frieza is here for himself. Even his underlings are nothing to him. He doesn't have any sympathy for his underlings. He is there to get the Dragon Ball so he can make a wish for himself. There's nothing about his people that help them. And I think, you know, he's obviously supposed to be this evil emperor, but Toriyama did a really good job of setting up of just how horrible he was. You know, everybody there is to serve him. When we first learn of Frieza's power level, it's against Nail. He tells him he's 530,000. This number is absolutely ridiculous. But what can we take away from this? He is one of the most powerful beings in the entire universe. The strongest beings aside from him are the Ginyu Force, and they're about 60k, except for Ginyu himself, who's around 120k. What the hell is Frieza worried about? Especially when you learn that he's actually well over millions. So what is Frieza worried about? Now, of course, this is in the manga as well as the anime, and that is the legend of the Super Saiyan. And even Ginyu knew about the fear that Frieza had. Zarbon knew. Dodoria knew. So, like, this was something that apparently Frieza couldn't really hide, and that his people, I guess, you know, because since his ancestors and stuff like that, had the fear of the Super Saiyan is like something to fear. And hence, you know, at least in the original manga, why he took out, you know, the planet to make sure that they could never become one. It is ironic, though, that Vegeta, of all people, Frieza never feared. He kept Vegeta alive for years. You know, he not only killed his father, he destroyed his people, you know, his planet and his people, but he kept them by his side. So then a lot of people might be like, well, that doesn't make sense. That's just kind of like a plot hole. It's not actually. Frieza knew Vegeta well enough that he knew he had no potential to become a Super Saiyan. He was not wrong. The Vegeta of that story arc had no possibility of becoming a Super Saiyan. He lacked certain emotional qualities he just did not have, which of course we learn later on is that intense rage. Watch it very carefully, whether you watch the anime or read the manga. Vegeta versus Frieza is a bit nervousness, terror, and sometimes a little overconfidence, you know, like when he gets healed after, you know, Kuririn like shoots him and stuff like that. There's never a moment where he's just like that pure rage that you need to hit that first time unlocking of Super Saiyan. Vegeta just never had that in him, and I think Frieza kind of knew that. You know, Vegeta just didn't have it in him to do it. That being said, that's why Goku was such a big factor here. Goku essentially was the wild card Frieza never imagined. Now let's kind of reverse things up here. Not even reverse things, but like kind of change it. The manga right here. Frieza destroys the Saiyans because of a specific reason, because he wanted to make sure a Super Saiyan never appeared. Before Dragon Ball Super, Toriyama did the Bardock special for those who ever seen it. I'm talking about the Toriyama Bardock special, Super Saiyan Bardock. And in that it says that when he got caught up in the blast that blew up Planet Vegeta, he somehow got sent back in time. It's pretty stupid, but the point is he gets sent back in time. He fights against Chilled, Frieza's ancestor, and he becomes the first kind of like, Super Saiyan that starts the whole fear of the Super Saiyans in Frieza's people, because Chilled's like, tell my people, like, to fear the Super Saiyan, and then that gets passed on a generation. So I do find it ironic that, like, it's one of those kind of cool time travel things, I guess you could say, that if Frieza hadn't, shot Bardock into the planet and all that stuff, like, he would have never sparked the whole Super Saiyan fear thing. It's weird. And then, of course, we jump ahead to Dragon Ball Super, and, we get the little bit with Beerus and stuff like that, and it kind of just, I just prefer, I guess, I love Dragon Ball Super, but I just kind of prefer the more simplicity, the pureness of, Frieza was scared of the Super Saiyan, so he kills the Saiyans, whatever. Now, I'm not going to get into every detail of the fight on Namek as it's quite long. So let's just focus on what's important for the character. His inability to do away with his enemies immediately. This is a common criticism. Why didn't Frieza just transform to his final form and kill everybody? Well, the obvious reason was that it was for the drama. Toriyama wanted to drag the story out as long as possible and have the boss keep leveling up. But there is another reason. He didn't expect them to catch up so fast. Okay, Toriyama did decide to suddenly power up Gohan, Piccolo, and Vegeta to stupid levels so that they could fight toe-to-toe with Frieza. But from Frieza's point of view, it was embarrassing and insulting to have to use so much effort against anyone, because there should be no one in the galaxy aside from Beerus and Boo who should be a threat to him. So when you go in with this understanding, the long dragged out fight makes much more sense. It's not until this moment here where he realizes how much he effed up. He could have killed them all from the start, but much like Vegeta, his pride got in the way. The most important thing to take away from this is, as we're trying to understand Frieza's character, this simply tells us that his people feared losing power. As we get towards the end of this video, when we talk about why Frieza never really changed his ways, it's the fact of losing that power. Not I mean power as in physical power, but losing the power that he had over the universe. Losing that power is his biggest fear, and once it is gone, he will forever chase after it. Frieza's return to Earth is basically just to set up the next arc, but it does so in a brilliant way. An old enemy returns for revenge, but is now turned into a machine, or at least part machine in Frieza's case. The subsequent story is literally the same thing. The Red Ribbon Army, one of Goku's oldest enemies, returns through Dr. Ghetto, who tries to get revenge on Goku by using machines. Frieza's made short work of, thanks to the time-traveling Trunks. Technically, this would be the end of Frieza, not including non-canon things, such as the end of Dragon Ball Z, Movie 12, or GT. The character was technically truly dead. But I do think there is something quite interesting here. As I said, the main thing here is revenge. And if we look back at Goku's past villains, like all the way back to Yamcha, the first one to try to get revenge on Goku after Goku and him fight for the first time, he knocks out one of Yamcha's teeth and Yamcha swears revenge. Of course, they end up becoming friends afterwards. From there, you can get into King Piccolo, he tries to get revenge through his reincarnation/son, but Piccolo becomes redeemed. Vegeta, he talks about revenge over and over again, and in the end, of course, ultimately becomes a good guy. So a lot of times these characters in the past come back for revenge, and most of them do get redeemed. However, first Frieza gets disposed of and thrown away, and then the Red Ribbon Army comes and gets disposed of and thrown away, technically, because the Red Ribbon Army does not get redeemed here. Now, I think you could argue this technically not the Red Ribbon Army getting their revenge. Dr. Ghetto is, and he's using the Red Ribbon name because he was never the leader of the Red Ribbon Army. The proper revenge would be in the film Dragon Ball Super Superhero. I still think that that's an interesting setup here, is that Frieza is an irredeemable character. And I think this is something we're going to see as we now move on into Dragon Ball Super. Toriyama decided to fully resurrect Frieza for the second canon Dragon Ball Z film, Dragon Ball Z Fukatsu no F, or Resurrection F. Frieza tries to get revenge again, but is this time ultimately killed by Goku. That's the story in a nutshell. But there is some new information, especially into Frieza's origins. We learn that Frieza and his father both knew of Beerus. They also knew about Majin Buu, which is huge. He says right in the scene that his father told him never to cross paths with them. Now, these were people that he could not touch. Upon his resurrection, Sorbet asks if they should bring back his father as well. Frieza says no. When we see his father for the first time, we learn his father generally cares for his son, as he shows concern over his son's near death, and then vows that they'll get revenge. But does he actually care, or does he care that their empire's reputation has been shattered and now is at stake? After Frieza is killed by Trunks, Cold immediately turns things around. Just like Frieza, Cold really only cares about himself, and I think it shows really well here. Knowing this when we get to Fukkatsu no F, Frieza probably had as little emotional connection to his father as his father did to him, and therefore could care less if his father were brought back to life. Another way of interpreting this is that his father could come back and challenge Frieza for the throne, as Frieza's past failures might make it seem like Daddy needs to step in and take over. Now, an interesting to note here is that he walked around in his second form while Frieza stayed in his first form. Okay, let's back up for a minute here. There has never been any canonical explanation from Toriyama or any other source about whether or not Cold could transform or if this was his only form to begin with. Over the years, there has been a lot of speculation, but no matter what you believe, the truth is Toriyama decided to give Cold the original Emperor of the Galaxy, a tall, menacing figure, while Frieza was this small and unassuming threat. Cold was clearly the intimidation factor, as just seeing him alone made people fear for their lives. Frieza, on the other hand, seemed frail and honestly didn't seem that threatening. The last and most important piece of information is he says he never trained in his life because his people are naturally gifted and they had no need to become stronger. This says so much about his character. For one, it gives him some character development, but in a unique way. He learns he had taken things for granted, being naturally gifted. He never considered actually trying to better himself, as he had no real equal. You could argue, knowing about Majin Buu and Beerus, maybe he would have tried hard, but hear me out. Buu was sealed away, and as far as he knew, Buu was never a real threat. Beerus left him alone as long as he didn't get in his way. However, if he suddenly started getting stronger, he might have gotten on Beerus' radar. But this takes us to his motivation, which is simply revenge. He trains for the first time and essentially unlocks his race's version of Super Saiyan in Golden Frieza, and it proves to be miles ahead of his original power. It still fails to be a match for Super Saiyan Blue. Now we see Frieza again in Super when Goku is forced to recruit him for the Tournament of Power. It's here we get a tease that Frieza might be redeemed by the end of the story. He pretends to try and betray them a few times, but ultimately in the end he helps them win. Whis gives him new life, and he uses the second, no third chance to return to his old life. Some people have questioned why Beerus told Whis to give Frieza his life back at the end of the Tournament of Power. I do not believe it's because they thought he might change his ways. He even comes right out and says he doesn't plan on changing. I personally believe it's for balance. Upon seeing how powerful Jiren and Toppo were, I think Beerus and Whis both realized there is no one left in their own universe who could push Goku and Vegeta to new heights. Seeing how powerful Frieza got in such a short time upon his first revival, they figured he'd go out and get even stronger, possibly proving a challenge to Goku and Vegeta. So as crazy as this sounds, Frieza is an essential part of the power... I think Frieza is an essential part of the power struggle in the universe. He returns to Earth with Brawly in hopes the Saiyans would kill each other, all while he used the Dragon Balls to increase his height. Toriyama wanted it to be abundantly clear that Frieza cannot and will not change. Unlike most of the people Goku encountered in his life, this is one that just refuses to change. I think a large part of why Frieza is the way he is due to his upbringing, which Dragon Ball clearly shows with Goku having a different upbringing from not only his brother, but the other Saiyans in general. Frieza was born into wealth, but he was also born into power, being the son of an emperor who ruled with an iron fist and had all other species groveling at his feet. In addition, his race appears to be gifted with natural strength that dwarfs even the most powerful and well-trained warriors in the universe. So much so, he had never even considered doing a push-up, let alone training to get any stronger. This gave him the impression that the other beings were beneath him.
皆さん、お待たせしました。宇宙の帝王、ここに完全復活です。
Now, one thing you could say is if Vegeta could change his ways, why couldn't Frieza? They are quite similar characters. Both grew up in lives of evil. They killed lots of people. So what's the difference? Vegeta had only ever known life of subjugation. He could never break free of Frieza's control. He held on to past trauma for so many years, hiding it down deep inside. When he dies by Frieza's hand, he cries to Goku, literal tears, and he tells him that this guy killed my father. He killed your father. He destroyed our people. You know, this is finally letting out everything he was holding on to for years. He was an emotional being, Vegeta. Frieza is not an emotional being. Frieza doesn't care about anyone but himself. Frieza, on the other hand, had only ever known a life of ruling over others, showing no empathy for anyone other than himself, not having any past trauma to hide. He grew up in luxury. He answered to no one. Then it was all taken away from him. And for that, he could never be a good person. I think the biggest thing we could take away from this is that Frieza is a product of his upbringing. I could think of no better example than Goku, whose pure nature comes from being raised by son Gohan. Frieza's cold and unforgiving nature is so ingrained into his being that it's impossible for him to change his ways, no matter how many chances at a new beginning he gets. So what do you guys think of Frieza? Are you a fan? Or do you wish he remained dead? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you walked away with a better understanding of the character and his motivations. If there's a villain you want to see me take a deep dive into, drop a comment below. I'm planning on finally finishing my Super manga versus anime series and then following that up with a deep dive of a character from Dragon Ball Super. As always, like, subscribe, and share. Turn notifications on so you never miss a video, and see you soon.